Oh, hello. Thank you very much for being here today. My name is Amy Johnson. I'm the director of the Brown County Historical Society. So the 2025 U.S. Dakota War commemoration is brought to you, sponsored by the Junior Pioneers of New Ulm and vicinity, with partnership with the New Ulm Library this year, and also supported by the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment. So as you can see, Corinne has books available here today. The Dakota Indian Internment Camp book that she has is also available for sale in the museum store, and she has signed a couple of copies for you guys today, so that is happening. As far as the rest of the commemoration schedule is concerned, on Saturday at 10:30 we'll have another downtown walking tour. At $7, we'll meet in the museum, or outside the museum in the museum. Prior to members, it is free for. And then from 11 to 3, the New Ulm Battery will be at the Kiesling House, and then the Kiesling House will be open from 11 to 3 as well. Admission into the house is $3. It is also free for members. So anyways, Corinne Marz is here today. Always a pleasure to have her. I just wanted to tell you that I was thinking about this today, and I first saw you speak in 2021 at our another commemoration on Alexander Ramsey's Words of War. And I still think about that very frequently. It would be beautiful. Always expanding on the history when we appreciate you very much. So anyways, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Corinne Marz.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Try to get set up here a little bit better. Good afternoon. It's always a pleasure to be here in New Ulm, and I especially want to thank the Executive Director, Amy Johnson, and Darla Gephardt for thinking of me and inviting me to this event. But I also want to thank all of you for coming, and especially thank you for the gift of your time. When we study all of the various events that make up this whole tragic event, the U.S. and Dakota Wars of 1862 and afterwards, we never want to forget all of the people that were involved. Today, I'm doing a little bit, something a little bit different. Usually I just give the facts, the history. But today I thought, because this year is the 20th anniversary of the printing of my first book, which is the Dakota Indian Internment Camp. And it's the 5th, and it will be the final printing. You get up to a certain age, and even good things that you have enjoyed working on end. And so we'll put this to rest. But I've really learned so much and met so many people. And so I thought I would share with you how the book how it came to be. Because generally when we hear about books or we read reviews, all of it, it's already in print, it's already there. And so there's always a story behind it. And then this book led to so many opportunities for me that I had no idea would ever occur, had no intention. I mean, I had no plans to ever write anything. And so on that table over there are all of the various things that I've been working on since 1999. And many of them aren't just mine. They are works of collaboration. And I might have just one article in, for example, at the end, there's the little box there with the Minnesota's heritage. We have a group of historians in not just the cities, but all around Minnesota. We have a historian from Glencoe that comes. And so we have all of these people who enjoy 19th century Minnesota history, and we get together. There's only a qualifier, is that you do have to be invited, and you do have to have something published, because we share information with each other, and we help each other, and that is the goal of all of this. There are this particular forum of the Dakota Week remembrance events is so important because every year we're getting farther and farther away from 1862. And in that time, we forget a lot of the events that actually occurred and how widespread it was and how devastating it was, not just in property, but in human lives. And so that is something that we have to remember, that the importance and how essential this forum is. And over the years, we know that there has been such a variety of speakers, everything that you can imagine. And yesterday, John Hammond's program on the trials and the legal designs and strategies that occurred. I mean, it was just amazing to listen to. You didn't want to miss one word. So let me see if I can get this right. There we are. And so we especially want to thank all of you for being here. Now, when I was mentioning that I worked in a collaboration with a lot of other historians and people interested in history, when we do a program, when we write a book, when we present a program, nobody ever really does it all on their own. And these are just some of the people that have helped me collect the information, provided support in lots of different ways. And one of the things I'm going to be doing first is that I've got lots of handouts. I'm going to be talking about a few different things. So they'll be coming around, and you might be seeing it prematurely, but hopefully we'll catch up with what you'll be seeing. I have and I'll just mention each one of them as they come by so you know what they are for and what they are from. This is a letter from Fort Snelling, October 1862, and it describes all of the epidemics that were ongoing in St. Paul. And so I thought that you would find this interesting. I'm going to be talking about photographs that were taken in the encampment. There's an article by Alan Woolworth that you might enjoy looking at. I have a list of all of the Dakota prisoners that were taken to the Davenport prison, and this was from Walt Bachman. Oh, thank you. One of the other things that Walt gave me was a working copy that was written inside the Dakota prison in Mankato. And before the executions in December, all of the Dakota men who were slated for execution were asked if they would like some spiritual advising. And they had a choice between a Protestant or the Catholic priest. And so one of the soldiers wrote down all of their information of which pastor or which priest they'd like to see. And then on this page, if you get the book and it comes by you and it's closed, it's on page 39. So this is Father Ravo's listing of all of the Dakota prisoners that chose him for their pastoral care. Thank you. And then finally, you know, in the old days, we had various ways of giving presentations. And what we used were overhead projectors. I still have mine at home. And these are the slides. This particular slide was from Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois. And when the Dakota men were down at the prison in Davenport, they made a pact among each other that they were not going to run away or try to escape. What they did instead was they worked on area farms, and they carved little trinkets that they sold. And this is a picture from the special collections at the Augustana College of something that one of the Dakota men made. And then I've got a number of other photos here from Minnesota Historical Society of other photographs that were taken in the internment camp. And now, no matter what part of the Dakota War we study, there are always 650 or more reasons why we are dedicated to this study of history. And those are the 650 or more people who were killed during the Dakota War. Now, we must remember that during the war that there were no Dakota women or children killed. But that was not the case here. And before I go on, I wanted to talk about 3 of the primary historians that we lost over the past few years. We have Lois Glevy on the far left, and then Mary Bakeman, master genealogist, editor, historian. She founded the genealogy desk at the Minnesota Historical Society. For 25 years, once a week, she was there manning that. And then, of course, there's Alan Woolworth, chief archaeologist of the Minnesota Historical Society, author, historian, editor. He used to live very close to me, so I would give him a ride to places, because one time I was driving down Highway 61 and I drove by him and he was going 20. And it was time, for him to just enjoy himself. So I would always pick him up, and I got the better deal. I would listen to him talk. And I always would think, if I could only remember what he's forgotten, but he never forgot anything. So just a wonderful trio of historians. And on that table over there, there's many of the things that they also worked on. Do I have to point it at something special? Am I doing well? There we go. That would not, this is good. This is good. So, and now here on August 21st, this a very significant day here in New Ulm. On the 19th and then the 23rd, you would be having the 2 large battles here in New Ulm, literally right outside the door here. This is a picture of Anton Gog, and this is the picture of the battle or the defense of New Ulm. And now when he was producing and preparing for this painting, he actually went out to Morton, and he spoke with a great number of the Dakota men who were still living in 1903, to tell him exactly what they did, how they participated, what they wore, what movements there were to engage in this great battle. And so we have this. Sorry.
That's okay. I'm so sorry.
So you just know what you're doing. In 1999, I paid a visit to the new visitor center, which was down at Fort Snelling State Park. Now, my family and I, we visited this park often. It's in the middle of the Twin Cities. It's right below the International Airport. And in fact, I was thinking about it this morning. In probably July of 1975 was the first time we took our oldest daughter there on a hike. She was about 3 months old, and we hiked around Pike Island with her. But this is the visitor center, and this is looking at the point of Pike Island. And so I went into the visitor center, and they had a very nice display about the history of this state park. The only thing I noticed was the exhibit in 1999, that it was titled the Fort Snelling Concentration Camp. And I, in my family, because we had extended family interred there, It was never referred to as a concentration camp. It was a place for our family of where they survived. They were protected there. Of course, it wasn't a place where they wanted to be, but it was at the end of the war, and everything out on the western frontier was either not safe for them to be at, as they were fearful for both, as Kurt Darlene calls them, revenge-minded whites, or hostile Indians, the Indians who had engaged in the killing. And so this was something that I found something new, something that I didn't understand. And you know from all of the literature that there is available on the Dakota War that there are dozens and dozens of books on every single topic that you can imagine. Every aspect, different people, goes through the timeline, but it was nothing on the internment camp. And so I assumed, and my bread and butter, my trade is I am a historical researcher. That's what I do. I find things, I collect things. And so I assumed that there was nothing available, because if there wasn't a book already, and there had been over more than 120 some years, 130 some years at that time, that there must not be anything to find. Well, I was wrong. I'm not doing well. Oh, that sounds great. Thank you, thank you. Now, for all of you that are familiar with the very first primary primer on the Dakota War, published by the Minnesota Historical Society, it is the Sioux Uprising of 1862, came in three covers, and I hope that's not mine. And it came with 2 titles. The contents are all the same. So if you ever see any one of these books, that you will be able to know that the covers are different, the titles are different, but the contents are identical. I was really disappointed when this book here came out at the Fort Snelling gift shop and admissions where I worked. I thought I was going to find something new, but there wasn't. And this book is the first place in 1962 where I saw the picture, that famous picture by Upton of the internment camp, where you're looking down into it from up on the fort bluff. And we'll go on just a moment because the little remote is in that room up there. It's okay. There we go. Wonderful. Thank you. And that is the picture that you see. Now this building that's right down here in the forefront, this was sort of an all-purpose building at Fort Snelling and in the internment camp. And when we see this camp, this is what we always think of what the internment camp was. But it was actually used for 3 separate groups of Dakota people. This first group, and they arrived in November 15th of 1862, and they left during the first week of May in 1863. But then the next group came. They were always called the First Circle because they were all relatives of his band of Chief Little Crows. And they were there from May and June through September. And then they were all shipped also on one of the steamboats back down to the prison at Davenport, and they remained there until 1866. Then there was a third band of them, and those were the relatives of the Dakota Scouts. Some were out at Fort Pope, out north Redwood Falls, but a lot of them stayed here at this site. And this site was only used from about December. This encampment was built about December of 1862. And then on March 19th, it was abandoned. And the reason why, every single person in this camp took all of their belongings and moved up the hill. If you've been to this park, you know you have to come down a steep bluff into the park. And the reason why they were moved up there is that it was spring and it was flooding. This is the floodplain, and so this fort was only used for, or this stockade was only used for just a short time. In Minnesota right now, we have a wonderful Dakota scholar, Corinne L. In the center here is a little laminate of a remembrance that he prepared. It lists many, if not all, of the people who were killed during the Dakota War. And Kurt has, I had an email from him on Monday and Tuesday, and that he's going to be sending the remainder of his little laminate sheets. That's about 45 to 50 copies as a gift to the gift shop here. And so they'll be available here. He has 2 premier books. In fact, when this, the Dakota Uprising, A Pictorial History came out in 1911, one of the reviewers said, this is as good as a book gets, and it is outstanding. This other one is, he visited the 200 graves that he found of all of the Dakota people who were, or people who were killed by the Dakota. My very first talk was in October of 2003. It was quite a frightful experience, not just that, you know, it's the first time that you're presenting and you don't know how it's going to be received. But many of the people that I knew, I had only known by name and by reputation, and that they were wonderful historians. And so Kurt Darlene was there, Rhoda Gilman was there. Sitting behind her was Bruce White. Then came in Alan Woolworth and his graphic designer, Charlie Bailey. And then right over here in the front here, and this young man I had met a number of times while I was working at the fort in admissions, was a young Lakota man and his 2 sons. And he and his father were members of the Fool Soldiers. So there is a living Fool Soldier Society at this time. And there's a modern picture of a St. Peter's Catholic Church, and then an old photo. I don't have the fellowship hall because it's been demolished and replaced. So, but I thought you would enjoy seeing this. This is one of the oldest churches in Minnesota, 1839. And they have services there, I believe, every Friday. They have Mass every Friday morning.
Where is this located?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't say. Mendota, Minnesota. So it's right across the river from Fort Snelling, historic Fort Snelling. This is a picture I thought you might enjoy. This is a historian, South Dakota historian, Doan Robinson. He actually interviewed many of the surviving Fool soldiers who rescued the Lake Chetek survivors. And as you know, they actually had, and he followed the route that they had been taken from Lake Chetek to where they were rescued by Mobridge. They had an 1,100-mile march. They actually did walk that whole way. And when they were rescued by these young teenage boys, these Fool soldiers, they were still wearing the clothing that they had been taken captive on August 20th. So from August 20th to about the first week in November. And so this was a picture, it was a proof of life picture taken at Fort Ransom, which is in southeastern South Dakota. And as you can tell, they didn't have too many varieties of fabric at the little shop there, the sutler store, because they primarily only have 2 different styles of fabric. There's 1 woman missing and 1 little boy missing out of this picture. That would be Mariah Cook and Julia Wright. She's the young woman, the adult on the far end there. Mariah Cook went with a Dakota woman whose husband had been killed, and then they had kidnapped her, this group of Dakota who attacked Lake Chetek. And they were concerned for the life of this little boy, Julia Wright's little boy. And so Mariah, this Dakota woman, and they decided to make an escape, which they did. And they made it, the young Dakota woman made it back to her home village, and Mariah Cook and the little Wright boy were released at Camp Release. And this is the monument at Mulbridge. So, as I said, this will be the fifth and final printing. It was done between two publishing companies. Alan Woolworth's company was Prairie Smoke Press. He did the first 2 or 3 printings, and then I've done, through my company, Minnesota Territory, the last 2 printings. And it's just been, such a learning experience to find out about printing and how it's done and who to trust. And it's an experience I hadn't expected to ever know. And I said that there are so many books written on the Dakota War. There are so many narratives on the Dakota War. And we know the first 3 that are most familiar are the one by Adrian E. Bell, June of 1863. Isaac Hurd, he wrote one also published in 1863. And then, of course, Sarah Wakefield's 1863, 6 Weeks in a Teepee. However, the Dakota at the internment camp produced the very first narrative, first published narrative. They wrote it at the internment camp. They presented it first in Dakota to Anton Fanier, who was their interpreter. And then with the help of the Reverend John Williamson, he read it back to them both in Dakota and then in English, because it was going to be sent to the President of the United States and what they wanted. And so this is the introduction to that. And now, yesterday and now today, we're dealing with 2 topics that are post-war, after the war. And we always think that after the war, everything is peaceful and things return to normal. We know that after World War II, that was not the case. In Europe, throughout Europe, there were a number of reprisals against people who had collaborated with the Nazis. All through Europe that occurred. And then also throughout Europe, there were literally millions of people wandering. They weren't in their home countries anymore. They either could not return to their homes, their villages, or their home countries, because either they didn't exist anymore or they weren't safe there. They didn't feel safe. So primarily it was the International Red Cross that established throughout Italy, Austria, Germany, France, Belgium, all of these camps, and they were called displaced persons camps. People were protected there. They were given medical care, and certainly many of them needed it. And so Mary Bakeman often suggested that the internment camp, even better than internment, it would be a displaced persons camp, because the Dakota Indians that were in that camp at that time were refugees. They had been displaced from their home out on the western frontier, all of their on their reservations, whether at the lower agency or the upper agency. It was not of their own doing that they were there. Of course they didn't want to be there. They all wanted to go home. But for many of them, they knew that their home no longer existed. One of the Sisseton chiefs, Gabriel Renville, was given the option to stay out on the frontier. And he went and looked at his home. Everything was gone. And if you've read his memoir, his narrative, you know he said, we went and we looked, we saw that everything had been destroyed. Literally looking at our options, we decided that going with the dependents was our way to stay alive. And it was very wise. I mean, he didn't have another option. And so whether they wanted to go there or not, it was what would keep them alive. And so this is the introduction to the first narrative that was written by Dakota. Please. Now, one of the things that we see in artwork is the cover. When I worked at the fort, the shop manager there, Florence Olson, would always say, it's the cover that sells the book. Anyway, at that time, David Geister and his wife, Pat, worked at the fort. And I asked him if he would possibly prepare a cover for this book that was coming. And he said yes. So this is a picture that his wife, Pat, sent me a week ago. Right at this time, he is working on a project for the new Minnesota Military History Museum, which will be at Fort Ripley. And he, when you see mannequins with uniforms on them, it's one thing. But David Geister just never does the ordinary. And as you can see, he's got a whole line of heads behind him there. They took photographs and drawings of these uniforms that will be on display, and they have the person, an image of the person who wore them. And David is creating a life-size, or an actual head to top each one of those mannequins and uniforms. So, and he's got a great love for the military. He's a veteran, he's a Marine. And so this picture is from last week. And then we have one more from Monday this week. This is from his garage. So the one that you just saw was his studio on the second floor of their home. This is out in the garage. So he creates he carves or molds the head from the picture or image. Then he makes a mold, and now he is pouring this clay mixture or plaster of Paris or whatever he's using to create the head. And I did want to tell you one little thing. I did have to edit this picture. On the far right here, you'll see an arm and a part of a body. I had to edit it. It was a picture of a naked man mannequin, and I didn't want to upset all of you. So, yeah, so you're only seeing a portion of that, but I did want to know why you're seeing just the arm. So it would have been, that's all you would have seen, You wouldn't have looked at David doing his work there. Okay, and so going to the contents. This is the map that the dependents took from the lower agency, and also the route that the prisoners took from the lower agency to Mankato. They took two separate routes, and the northern route was the brand new road. And that was the road that just a few days, in fact, the day that the Dakota War officially began on August 18th, that was the day that the gold arrived, the annuity gold was finally received. And it took those 5 men coming by wagon from Fort Snelling just about 2 days, a good 2 days. It took the 3.5-mile long wagon train of Dakota women and children and elderly and all of the soldiers that were with them about 7 days to make that journey. And now this was a direct route. It's not the scenic route. What they wanted to do was to have as few river crossings as was possible. They just wanted to get there quickly, get there safely, and so that's the route they took. You will see that there's a little data point, and it will talk about foraging. For my book, when I talked about this route, I used 2 sources. That would have been Samuel Brown's In Captivity, which is a fine book. If you have not read that one is an excellent book. And then also Gabriel Renville's narrative, because he talks about that route also. But now we have one more data point, and that this map is from one of the book sets over on the the table over there, The Trail of Tears. And that gives you one more data point because we had proof by 2008, when that book was written, The Trail of Tears, that there was a claim filed against the United States government for payment for forage for the oxen and the horses that passed by. Then we have the record in pictures at the fort. And as you saw a lot of those images, we had a group of wonderful pioneer photographers in St. Paul. They all had their own galleries. Sometimes they worked together. Adrienne Ebell actually came out to Minnesota that week in August 17th, 18th, because he wanted to photograph Indians. He escaped with his life, but he did create that little book in 1863. And he is credited with photographing the only image that was actually taken during the war itself. And then back on the entry table there, I have 2 postcards if you're interested in taking any of them. There is one of that image of Adrienne Ebell, the escape across the prairie. And then there's also a picture of Old Betsy, and that one was by Joel Whitney. And so I've got some packages back there. You're welcome to each take one of each. I've got plenty. And so these are the listing of the photographers. They would go into the internment camp. You had to get a pass. You could go in. You could take pictures. You could visit. One of the things Joel Whitney said was that he would take extra pictures, and then after he would go back to his studio in St. Paul, he would develop them and bring them back to the internment camp and give these people that he photographed copies so they could sell them, because visitors came through all the time to gawk at them, and they could sell them a picture, make $1 or a few cents. And so this was how he paid for their permission of use. One thing that has happened in the market of these photographs that were taken in the internment camp is that the value of them has exploded. Now, this album, there's a little picture of the album there. This was one that was for sale a few years ago. 35 pictures, $14,000 it sold for. When Joel Whitney was selling his pictures, he explained that he sold thousands and thousands of these Indian pictures, not just in Minnesota, but on the East Coast and even in Europe. It was a large part of his income. And these are some other pictures of the people that were in the internment camp or in the prison, or whose pictures they had. Now, there is a picture there of Cut Nose with the feathers on the top of his headdress. And there is a picture there next to Old Betsy. There's actually 3 pictures there of Old Betsy, a stereo view, and then the one that you'll see over on the table. But next to her rather, is a picture of John Otherday. And as we were talking yesterday, John Otherday became a Christian convert in 1858. In 1857, he got into a terrible fight with a person who was never his friend, Cut Nose. But Cut Nose's name is not actually correct. It should be Bit Nose, because they got into such a violent fight that John Otherday bit most of his nostril off on one side. But he's come down to us known as Cut Nose. And here we are with the narrative, the first narrative. And so here we have when it was first written. It was written between December 17th and 18th, refined, and then it was finally published in the Congressional Globe in January of 1863. This was up to the minute news. You know, we're used to things just like this. To have something published, first of all, it had to get to the East Coast. It had to get to the Congress, and then finally it had to be published. And here we are, the opening. And here they say that, this is who we are. We're petitioning President Lincoln, and we know that many people were killed. And this is a little bit more explanation of why they think that the war occurred, the causes. And then what they would like. It is not a very long, narrative. But it gives their points, and they are speaking directly to President Lincoln, and what they would like to do. The Sisseton would like to go to the Coteau, which eventually they would, and Gabriel Renville, through the rest of his life, would work on that process, securing that land. The lower agency people wanted to return to the lower agency and farm, but of course that did not happen. And then this is a description of who they are, how many there are, and that they are waiting on the pleasure of President Lincoln. And then it was signed by all of the chiefs and the lead men. Now, in the center there, that is Wakuta, Chief Wakuta. He had a wonderful village site just south of Red Wing. It is spectacular. It's right on the bluff. Now that's where the $1 million homes are. But when his village was there, it's just a beautiful place. And if you ever drive down to Red Wing, it's probably about 5 or 6 minutes south of there. Take the route into Wakuta and get some of the views there. The picture next to him is Teopi, and Teopi was one of the children of Old Betts, and also a relative of John the Baptist. And down here on the bottom here is a picture of, because I don't have a picture of my great-great-grandmother, but I have a picture of both of her sisters. And this is Jenny Hoffman and her husband, John Hoffman. And this is also my great-great-grandmother's, her brother, Wabasha III. And so they were all in the internment camp. And here we have the rest of the signatures and 2 more pictures. Little Paul Mazakuta. We know him as Mani, but both references to his name in here, could be a misspelling, has a little different spelling. And then this is another picture of John Otherday. In 1858, when all of these chiefs were in Washington, D.C., as part of the Treaty of 1858, they were all photographed at the Schindler Photography Studio in Washington, and was just an excellent photographer. This is one thing that is very difficult to get concrete numbers on. People were coming, people were going, but we do know that the death rate was terrible. It was terrible. The official count is about 104 or so, but both Reverend Riggs and Gabriel Renville said that there were 5 to 10 deaths daily, or there were many deaths daily. And so, if we calculate all of those deaths, we have to be objective and see what is sensible. Is it just the 104, or could there possibly have been more? And I mean, it certainly is sensible. And so we want, yes, sir.
Are you talking about white settlers or
No,
Dakota?
just the Dakota in the internment camp. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so every day there was an accounting of the Dakota, and it was called the daily roster. Each chief counted all of his people, and the reason that they did that each day was to have the right number to order the rations, the food rations. So, but we do know that there were, yes, sir?
So what was the total count been there at the highest level?
About 1,601. There was Samuel Brown in captivity. He writes that there was a census taken right before they left the Lower Sioux Agency. Okay, and at that time it was 698 people. On December 2nd, there was another census taken, and it was 601 or 1,601 at that time. And so, we're having this fluctuation of people dying and people being brought in also, because out on the Dakota Plains, the Dakota out there were starving, those that had fled. And so they were surrendering, and they were being brought into Fort Snelling. So, I know that there are those records somewhere. I have not seen them, and I have not found them yet, but someday someone will, and then we will have an accurate and correct count. Right now, I can say it's between 104 and maybe 150, 200, 300, okay? Because we want to be honest and objective of because we don't know, okay? So, but we do know one thing about the various diseases that affected the internment camp, is that this is what killed them. Remember, in 1862, there are no vaccines. There's a vaccine for one terrible epidemic of the time, and that was smallpox. But for whooping cough, tetanus, scarlet fever, measles. Here are just some of the pictures from today that we are seeing. Here, because, we don't often realize that measles is spread because it is basically a disease spread through the respiratory system. So when people would cough or sneeze, all of those little droplets with that disease in them is up in the air for people to ingest. So it's good to have a mask on. But those little droplets, they remain viable to kill for hours, 3-4 hours. Yes. And here, a little chart from the Canadian government that 9 out of 10 people will contract measles if they are not vaccinated. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was at my own doctor's office. Check in, receptionist said, "Do you have a cough?" No. "Do you know anyone with measles?" In my whole life, I have never heard that before. My doctor comes in and I said, "Dr. Williams, what's going on?" I said, "Next time I come, are they going to say, 'Do you have a cough?'" No. "Do you know anyone with polio?" I mean, we do not realize, and this is what my own doctor was saying to me. She said, "We think that antibiotics are the miracle drugs, but it is the vaccines that have saved millions of people, especially our children." And so, go on to the next. These are diseases that we don't know about. I mean, I don't know about them. 1907, in my neighborhood of Cottage Grove, St. Paul Park, Newport, there was a terrible epidemic of whooping cough. My own grandparents lost 2 little boys. They were 2 years old, pair of twins. Down the street, my grandpa's brother and his wife, they lost both of their children. Whooping cough. Scarlet fever. We don't see scarlet fever. And in fact, there were other pictures that were available where you get a red tongue. I mean, these are tools for diagnosing these diseases that, doctors probably only see in pictures too. Yes?
These diseases that return to the Dakota in the internment camp
Yes.
at the same time of killing the settlers that had fled to the metro area for protection after everything was burnt off.
Exactly. In fact, the one letter, I don't know if it came by, but there was one letter from a soldier who was writing to his wife. He was from down out east, I think, but he was stationed at Fort Snelling, and he had been into St. Paul, and he was talking about all the diseases he had seen. This is October of 1862, so before the Dakota get here. These diseases, they don't know that they, who they should target and who they shouldn't target. They're going to take whoever they can get. And so it's true, they were already here. Everyone was suffering from these diseases. And we don't want anyone to. Okay. Chapter 5, Surviving Each Day. There is a little subchapter in Chapter 5, and I have it labeled, call it what you will. I don't, if you really believe that the internment camp was a concentration camp, well, then you are perfectly free to believe and think that. I do not think that. I think it was a displaced persons camp. It was a place of protection. They were fed there. Of course, they didn't want to be there. They wanted to be home. But home maybe didn't exist anymore or would not for years to come. When you think of concentration camps, here on the far screen, you see the Frederick Upton image. But below it here is a little better picture of what the stockades looked like. This one was from the prisoner of war camp that was on Rock Island. So the Confederates were in here. And this was a hellhole. This was terrible. But you can see there were little steps that go up. There is a little deck that went all the way around. So the soldiers could peer down into the camp, the prison, and see what was going on, who was there, what was happening, and they would be safe. And so they had like a blueprint. All of the stockades looked the same. So that is most likely what the one at Fort Snelling looked like. It's just that this photograph doesn't show this. These pictures here are from Dachau. And my father told a number of stories about this particular camp. Now, when we think of Dachau, it was the very first concentration camp. And my family and I we visited just a few years ago. One of the things that we saw was the Reverend Martin Niemöller's prison cell, because he was a political prison and not Jewish or a Roma or some other person that the Nazis cared for even less than political prisoners. He had his own place, his own prison, at a tiny little prison. And he is the German Lutheran pastor with the familiar saying that they came for the socialists, and I wasn't a socialist, so I was silent. They came for the trade unionists, and I wasn't a trade unionist, so I was silent. They came for the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew, so I was silent. And then they came for me, and there was nobody left to speak for me. And so he was at Dachau in that little cell from 1937 until the Americans liberated him in April of 1945. But this is what the soldiers, our soldiers, found when they entered Dachau. Now, Dachau actually was not like an Auschwitz or a Treblinka or a Sobibor, where it was just all killing. There was this camp, there was this Dachau, it's in the middle of a city, by the way. But they had about 123 satellite camps, and it was working people to death, slave labor. And so if they couldn't do the work, well, then they were exterminated. And this picture down here, this wall that's in the background there, that is still there. And that is the entrance now to the Dachau Memorial Site. But it's just very bizarre, is that when you come in, there is an apartment complex built just on the other side of this wall. And today, Dachau-Stadt, or the city of Dachau, is regarded as a bedroom community for people who work in Munich, because it's cheaper to live there. Can't imagine why. But the apartment complex is probably 8, maybe 10 stories tall, has a little veranda on each apartment. But when you look down from your apartment when you're having your morning coffee or your dinner, you're sitting out on your veranda, you get to see the 2 crematoriums from your view. That is what you see. Now, none of this was at the internment camp. It was a displaced person camp to keep people alive. They had to be kept safe. Lincoln had said, you have to keep them safe. And this was their option. There was food, protection, and then was going to be decided what was going to happen to them next. These are pictures of displaced person camps. And they might not look much different, but these people have a future. And then they would board boats. About 1,300 of them boarded 2 separate riverboats, and they went down to Davenport. Some took trains, some boarded other riverboats, and headed for Crow Creek. About 30 of them were taken under the guardianship of Henry Sibley, and he brought them up to his property, and he cared for them there. Somewhere between 90 and 130 or 140 went to Faribault, and they were under the protection of Alexander Faribault, lived on his property. He provided for them. It bankrupted him, but that's what he intended to do. He intended to care for these people who had no other way. About 150 of them or so went out to Camp Pope, which was part of the Dakota Scouts system that was set up. And these were their family members. And then some of them would come back and forth to the top of the hill at Fort Snelling State Park and camp there for the next year or even 2 years until the Scouts were disbanded. So I had never intended to write about the internment camp. My only goal was to see if I could find anything that was in the written and historical record. And so all of these things were unexpected consequences. And I've had such a wonderful time meeting with all of these people, visiting historic sites and museums and societies. And I simply thank you very much for your time. Thank you so much for coming today. Are there any questions? Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering, you mentioned that your actual family was in the internment camp.
Yes.
Were any of them chiefs, or are they listed on the letter
Um,
here in your book?
Yes, I believe that if you look at the
I found it on page 161 and 62.
right, Wabasha was Wabasha 3. He was a brother to my great-great-grandmother. And now, one thing about my Dakota family is that none of them were ever exiled. They all stayed in Minnesota. Most of my family after that, my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and even my father for a time lived at Prairie Island. So, but I consider myself a Métis. I am mixed. I am a lineal descendant. I am not a tribal member. So, I always think that is important because, I am what I am. French Canadian, English, Dakota, German. My mother was from New Ulm. Alt-Prussian, Old Prussia, and Bavarian. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
Is there a listing of the mixed bloods and the others that were there?
Yes.
I
Yes.
asked that because 2 of my ancestors' families were there,
Oh.
but were released pretty early.
Right, and that's what happened. Between that 1698 and then the 1601, there were a number of the mixed bloods, especially, that went to their own homes after they were released. The entire Brown family, they lost their large stone structure, which was out by Sacred Heart, that was burned. But they had property in Henderson, because Henderson was founded by Joseph Brown, and Henderson was his mother's maiden name. And I've got here, now they use the term here, half-breeds, but we would use mixed bloods today. Yes. So there are a number of those families listed here, and if you want to come up and take a look later at this, this will give you all of these. And then you can see if your family's name is listed there too. The Browns, and then many of the Faribaults, although there are some Faribaults here. Most of them, they went to their own homes, their own properties. Yeah, yes.
Did Bishop Whipple also protect and have people on his property that he took care of on his farm?
Well, I think he probably donated funds for their care. However, he encouraged Alexander Faribault to do that because he had the big farm, the big property, and so it was a good thing. It was a good thing that it was done. Yes, ma'am.
Were they able to bring, like the teepees or other living, and the tools that they needed to take care of themselves? Were those brought with? Did they bring them themselves, or were some of those things provided for them?
Everything that they had was their own. The teepees that you saw in that photograph, all of their own. Many of the wagons that they traveled on were their own. And they also had horses or oxen, and there is a record of an auction that was done in January of 1863. The reason that this auction was done is all of that stuff that they owned, those wagons, those horses, those oxen, they were outside the stockade, and people were coming and stealing it. And so the commander of Fort Snelling said, let's just sell everything. He got their agreement, that they should have an auction, they're going to sell it, and then all of that property, those funds were given to those Indians to whom all that stuff belonged. But what was very sad is that those teepees, things only last so long. And so by the time they were out in Crow Creek for a year or two, those, it was very ill-worn. Their clothing was ill-worn. That was a terrible place for them to be. And then in 1866, when they were pardoned in Davenport and brought out, those that wanted to come from Crow Creek traveled south, and they met at Santee, and that's where the government had set up a new place for them. That's the new reservation. What's very interesting is that picture of Wabasha III, when he died, he was buried at the Episcopalian Cemetery at Santee, at Nobu Creek. And he is buried right next to Joseph Godfrey. I mean, it just is uncanny that they would put those two people together. When the people moved to Santee, the new reservation there in Nebraska, and it's right at the corner of South Dakota and Minnesota, and it's kind of right at that corner right there. The people that actually owned those properties were told, all of these Indians are coming, we want your land ready and prepared for them, because they came in June. They had the fields ready, so when they would move in, all they would need to do was start caring for the property and harvest their first crop there. So, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Corinne. So I introduced myself yesterday. Many of you were here, but just one more time, wanted to say my name's Christina Kester. I am the new program coordinator at the museum. Wanted to point out a few things. So first of all, we are in our U.S. Dakota War Commemoration Week, so we had these 2 lunch and a bite of history speakers. We do have another walking tour taking place this Saturday at 10:30. That's $7. Museum members are free, so you can meet outside or actually at the front desk of the museum. Yes, sir.
Jerry Sweeney given that one?
I am sorry to say he gave today's and he is not giving Saturdays. So if you're interested, take part in that. And on Sunday, Darla Gebhardt will be leading a tour of the Pioneer section of the New Ulm Cemetery. So that is a free tour at 2 p.m. and you can meet at the cemetery maintenance building. And then I also wanted to point out on the front table where you checked in, we have our next 2 lunch and a bite of histories planned. So in September, Julie Farrell will be speaking on counterfeiting. It's called Funny Money, so counterfeiting in the 1930s. And in October, we have Kim Kerrigan coming to speak about his grand uncle, James Schneider, who was a turner here in New Ulm, and he eventually perished in the Iroquois Theater fire in Chicago. So he is going to share about that. That's in October. You can sign up for both of those events at the front table here. And then lastly, the Hanska Area History Group is putting together a driving history tour on Sunday, August 31st from 2 to 5 p.m. So that is a free tour. A number of the historic sites around Hanska will be open for you to view. There's a flyer on the table on that far wall. Yes?
What is happening tomorrow for the commemoration?
Tomorrow, nothing on Friday. On Saturday, we have the walking tour, and we also have the battery. The New Ulm Battery will be outside the Kiesling House. And then on Sunday is the tour of the cemetery. All right, thank you again, Corinne.